The third scripture reading comes also from John's Gospel. It comes from the 11th chapter. It's the story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And I'll begin with verse 7. No, I'm going to start with verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sister sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, moving to verse 17. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away. And many of the Jews who had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came near where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" So Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please pray with me. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. I'm not going to preach on the story of Lazarus this morning. I wanted to share it with you to give you a taste of some of the material that's in John's Gospel that isn't in any of the other Gospels. There's a number of events and stories that only John has the accounting of, and this story about the raising of Lazarus from the dead is one of them. It's a powerful enough story that I think it appropriately can stand on its own, and I leave it for your reflection, except to tell you this. I was sharing with Pastor Nicole and Pastor Mike Peacock earlier this week on the study that's online that there is a biblical scholar named Ben Wetherington. He taught at the school that Kenny Hubble graduated from, and he's presented a paper fairly recently at the Society of Biblical Literature, which is the national gathering of all of the biblical studies wonks every year. Now they have a gathering and they come and present papers, and it's the international event for those who are about biblical scholarship. And Professor Wetherington read this paper there, and in the paper, he is lifting up the reasons that he believes that the Gospel of John is actually the Gospel of Lazarus. His proposal is that there are significant and substantive internal cues in the gospel itself that make the case that this gospel, the Gospel of John, is the account about the life of Jesus from someone whom Jesus raised from the dead. Now, if you're interested in seeing those arguments, send me an email and I'll send the article to you. And I'd enjoy doing that. I'm not going to preach on that today. Instead, I want to talk about the places in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, I am the light of the world, and the places where John speaks of the Word. The way a gospel opens is not only interesting, but also telling. You remember that in Mark's gospel, Jesus appears on the scene as an adult. He comes forward to be baptized by John the Baptist. If you're going to tell the story of the life of Jesus, how would you begin? Luke begins with baby stories, the infancy stories that you know so well. Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem, and the baby being born there, and the angels appearing to the shepherds in the field, and also, though we don't read it as often, the grandparents, the great uncles and aunts that flank the story on either side, Zechariah and Elizabeth, as they learn of the coming of their child, John the Baptist, and Simeon and Anna, who are there when Jesus is presented in the temple and rejoice at being able to see this coming to pass. Luke starts with early family stories. Matthew starts with a genealogy and a substantive one, and also the Magi story, which is also an infancy story. But the Gospel of John doesn't open with any of that. Instead, it's a philosophical declaration. No family stories. It's a philosophical declaration about the beginning of all things coming from God's creative purposes. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, I suspect that those words sound familiar to you, even if in your familiarity you may not have remembered where they come from exactly in the Bible. They come from the Gospel of John at the beginning. In the beginning was the Logos, that's a Greek word, and it's translated into English typically as Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word, the Logos, was God. You may associate that phrasing with Christmas Eve, and that's because those words are often read on Christmas Eve as we light the Christmas candles and pass the light amongst us. And so you may think of those words being a part of the liturgy at that time. You're not alone if you think that way. Many churches share in that practice. It's because they're often read there. That's why you're thinking of them about that holiday. St. Augustine and St. Jerome, who long ago were early translators of the Bible, they thought that the word logos was best translated, and they were translating into Latin, they thought it was best translated with two words. They were using either living word, in the beginning was the living word, or in the beginning was the acting word. They wanted the word to carry a sense of something happening, some creative activity happening. In opening his gospel this way with a philosophical prologue, John is speaking to the world. the whole world. He's speaking to communities outside of Israel. He's speaking particularly, I believe, to those who are seeking to understand the universe using reason and philosophy, and perhaps in the earliest senses of the word, science. He's speaking to those who are trying to understand the universe through reason. John opens by saying, the creative purposes of God, which are at work in the beginning of all things, they were best seen in one person, Jesus of Nazareth. This is not such a foreign idea to you. You have some experience with the creative power of a spoken word. After all, the Bible begins with words from Genesis. In the beginning, God said, and it was so. It's God's word that makes it so. Creation began because God said so. God said, let there be, and there was. It's the word that moves to create. Consider all of the spoken words whose creative power has reality-shaping influence in your life. Words that have been a part of the fabric of your life that have, in their creative power, shaped your future. I love you. Will you marry me? The cancer has metastasized. Congratulations, you have graduated. When we take vows, make promises binding us one to another, we use words. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Words bind us in promises. I'm remembering in the spring of 1983, in April, as I was in my last year of seminary, Emily and I were in the small married student housing they had for seniors, and we were sitting by the phone. All phones were a landline in those days. And we'd gotten a note telling us that a call was going to come at that day at a certain time, and we waited for the phone to ring. And it was Sandy Gear, who was a member of this congregation and was the chairman of the search committee that had interviewed with me. And they were calling, and the voice on the other end was Sandy, and he said, John, I'm calling to extend to you a call from this congregation to come and be one of our pastors. And out of those words, the rest of my life was changed and figured. Words are still the vehicle by which creative transformation is conveyed. Many old churches have stained glass windows in a series of 3. At the very top is an eye representing the all-seeing wisdom of God, and around it sometimes beams of light. And underneath that is another window which shows the Bible open, the Word. God is found in God's Word. And underneath that, a third window, which is Jesus doing some act of his ministry, the message being God, through his word, is seen in Jesus Christ. Words are still the vehicle by which creative transformation is conveyed. The connection is God's creative love, God's word. There are other things in John's gospel besides the story of Lazarus that are particular to John, and so many of them involve Jesus speaking and light occurring. Nicodemus, who comes to Jesus in the dark of night, seeking answers. The healing of the blind man in the 9th chapter, whom Jesus heals and restores sight to, saying to the disciples, I am the light of the world. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Lazarus, who comes out of his own tomb, out of the valley of the shadow of death, because Jesus speaks in a loud voice saying, Lazarus, come out. The Bible begins with God's words, let there be light. John's gospel is declaring to us the word that God spoke at creation we have seen in the life of Jesus. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus is the light of the world, the manifestation of God's creative, all-powerful love. I'm thinking of Dick Reddick this morning, who was a member of this church and sang in the choir before he went to glory. Dick was a guy who was full of opinions and would bring them forward to you, especially when he thought you needed them. And he came to me one Christmas Eve. We had multiple services, and he came out of the choir between the services. And he said to me, talking about the lighting of the candle light on Christmas Eve that we pass, he said to me, "You're not doing that right." And I was a little taken aback. Actually, what he said to me was, "John, you're doing that wrong." And I thought I was sort of the authority on how it should be done. And so I said to him, "Oh, really? What do you mean?" And he said to me, "When you say those words, John, Jesus is the light of the world, at the same time you have to lift the candle up. You have to lift it up so that everybody else will lift their candle up as well. When you say the words, Jesus is the light of the world, hold the light up. You have to let it be seen. And others have to lift theirs up so that it can be seen also. And Jesus was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And you know something? He was right. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." And as his followers, as Jesus' church, we lift that up. We lift that up so that the world can see it. We lift that up with our own actions and our own words and our own lives and our life together, so that no matter how dark the corner, people can see that Jesus is the light of the world and the darkness has not overcome it. We lift that up. Amen.